Did you really think you knew me, Michael? Clara's words landed like a whisper of thunder, catching him off guard. The Lagos skyline stretched endlessly behind them, glass towers shimmering under the midday sun, but Michael barely noticed. All he could focus on was her calm gaze, serene, unreadable, yet filled with an intensity that made his chest tighten. Michael had believed he understood Clara. He had seen her laugh, watched the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, admired her composure under pressure. But tonight, at the rooftop brunch of a high-profile Lagos charity event, he felt a flicker of doubt for the first time. Something about her was deeper than he could ever imagine. "You're going to find out," Clara continued, her voice soft but deliberate, "that I am far more than what you've assumed." Michael's mind raced. He prided himself on reading people, on knowing their motives before they revealed them. But with Clara, every assumption had been wrong. Every guess, shallow. Flashback. 6 months ago, he had met her at a gala. She had smiled warmly at him, deflecting attention from herself with elegance and charm. He had assumed humility. He had assumed simplicity. She had seemed ordinary, a beautiful woman from a good family. But he hadn't seen the layers, the careful strategy beneath her gentle demeanor. Now, standing before him, Clara radiated a quiet confidence that made him uneasy. He tried to mask it with humor. "Clara, you're being dramatic," he said, attempting a charming smile. But the usual effect didn't land. She wasn't laughing, and she wasn't moving. Clara tilted her head slightly, letting the wind brush strands of her hair across her face. "Dramatic? Perhaps. Or maybe it's time you realize that sometimes the world is not what it seems. Sometimes people are not what they appear." Michael swallowed, a dry laugh escaping. "You're impossible," he murmured. And in that instant, he felt the weight of truth pressing in, a feeling he couldn't shake. Even as he tried to dismiss it, around them, the rooftop hummed with life, waiters moving silently, glasses clinking, conversations blending into a murmur. The Lagos sun glinted off the river in the distance. But all that faded as Michael's thoughts spiraled. Clara had always been composed, almost unnervingly so. But tonight there was a depth he couldn't decipher. She stepped closer, subtly, not aggressively, but with purpose. "You've assumed so much about me," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "And soon you'll understand that assumptions are dangerous." Michael's pulse quickened. Every instinct, every ounce of his confidence, whispered that he was on the edge of something he couldn't control. The woman he had loved, trusted, and believed he understood was about to change everything. And he had no idea it was coming. The following weeks felt like a delicate game of chess, and Michael was already losing without realizing it. Every time he saw Clara, she was calm, composed, and impossibly graceful. But subtle hints almost invisible began to disturb his confidence. Invitations to private events he hadn't known existed. Brief mentions of business meetings that seemed beyond her usual social circles. And glimpses of an elegance in her lifestyle that didn't quite fit the ordinary image he had built in his mind. Michael had always considered himself perceptive. He prided himself on reading people, predicting intentions, and making strategic moves in both business and romance. Yet Clara, with her serene smile and quiet authority, remained unreadable. Even his closest friends noticed the change in him. Daniel, his business partner, leaned in one evening at a dinner gathering. "You seem distracted." "Something about Clara?" Michael waved it off. "She's nothing I haven't handled before. Just mysterious, that's all." But the truth was, he felt the first twinges of unease he hadn't known in years. He began noticing small discrepancies. A car she sometimes arrived in that was too luxurious to be hers. Security personnel at venues who seemed to respect her in ways unusual for someone of her apparent social standing. And her uncanny ability to anticipate situations, offering advice that turned out to be perfectly timed. Meanwhile, Clara maintained her facade of simplicity, carefully controlling what she revealed. She allowed Michael to think he understood her while keeping her private world the one of investments. Businesses and influence completely hidden. Every word she spoke was deliberate, every smile measured. She was teaching him, without him knowing, that appearances could deceive. One afternoon, While walking through the streets of Victoria Island, Michael jokingly remarked, "You always have a way of surprising me." "It's like there's more to you than meets the eye." Clara smiled faintly, eyes glinting with an unreadable expression. "Perhaps you're right," she said softly, letting the words linger in the warm, bustling air. "But the question is, are you ready to see it?" Michael laughed nervously, brushing it off. But inside he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the edge of a revelation far beyond his imagination. The dynamic had subtly shifted. He felt drawn to her even more, but also wary. There was an underlying power in her presence, a quiet dominance he hadn't encountered before. Flashback, years earlier. Clara's family had built an empire quietly, avoiding the spotlight. She had inherited the majority stake at a young age, but instead of flaunting it, she chose discretion, observing human behavior, learning the value of patience, and mastering strategy. It was a legacy of wisdom, cunning, and power, a legacy Michael had no idea existed. Yet all his interactions with her were now influenced by it. The weeks stretched on, tension growing with each encounter. Michael, unaware of her secret wealth, began to feel that every decision he made in her presence carried weight beyond his understanding. And Clara, with every calculated smile and seemingly innocent remark, was steadily steering him toward a truth that would shatter his world completely. By the time he realized something was amiss, the invisible threads of her influence had already begun to weave a web around him. Michael had always considered himself the master of control his business ventures, social circles, even his romantic pursuits. But over the past few weeks, disquieting realization was beginning to settle in. Clara was not only unpredictable, she was untouchable in ways he hadn't accounted for. It started with small things. A meeting Michael had confidently scheduled with a prominent investor was subtly postponed, redirected, and reshaped by someone he assumed had no influence. He later learned the investor had met Clara the night before at a charity gala, where her charm and intellect left a lasting impression. Michael had not been present, and yet her presence had shifted the deal entirely in her favor. At home, her influence was more subtle, but no less unnerving. Casual conversations about art investments, philanthropy, and Nigerian tech startups revealed insights that caught him off guard. "You think you know Lago's business trends?" she asked one evening over dinner. "Sometimes it's the quiet moves that make the loudest impact." Her tone was light, almost teasing, but the weight behind her words hit him like a thunderclap. He was beginning to sense that her wealth and power were not just rumors or whispers, they were real, calculated, and intentionally hidden. Michael's pride resisted the truth. He had built his life on the assumption that he was savvy, informed, and in control. Yet here was Clara, always several steps ahead, guiding interactions, shaping perceptions, and testing his judgment without him realizing it. His friends noticed his unease. Daniel leaned in one evening at the private club, whispering, "She's not just a woman, Michael. You're being played." In the most elegant way. Michael scoffed, but couldn't shake the thought. Every interaction with Clara now carried a subtle weight. When she mentioned an upcoming art auction, he assumed it was casual conversation, but days later, the auction became the talk of Lagos business circles. With Clara quietly orchestrating an introduction to a key investor that had previously eluded him. Flashback, Clara remembered her mother's teachings vividly. Observe before acting, child. Strength is silent. Power is patient. These lessons had guided her since childhood, shaping her into someone who understood the rhythm of human behavior. She had learned early that humility could mask influence and patience could outmaneuver arrogance. Michael, in his overconfidence, was now the perfect example of someone blinded by assumptions. The shift became undeniable one Friday afternoon. Michael, frustrated from a mismanaged business deal, confronted Clara in their penthouse. "How do you always know what's happening before I do?" he demanded, genuinely confused and slightly afraid. Clara remained calm, sipping her wine. "Maybe you don't see the whole picture," she said softly, a subtle smirk forming. "Or maybe you're only seeing what I allow you to see." Michael froze, realizing for the first time that he had been interacting with someone whose influence extended far beyond his perception. Every decision he made, every confident assumption, had been quietly guided, redirected, or observed. And the more he struggled to regain control, the tighter Clara's unseen grasp became. In that moment, he began to understand that the woman he had thought he knew, the one he had pursued with charm, confidence, and ambition, was no ordinary partner. She was a strategist, a force, and a billionaire hiding in plain sight. And Michael, for all his experience and confidence, was now completely exposed. The weeks that followed were a storm of subtle manipulation and quiet observation. Michael found himself increasingly on edge, sensing the invisible currents Clara had set in motion. Every casual mention of business, every introduction to a new acquaintance, carried weight far beyond what he initially assumed. One evening, Clara invited Michael to what she described as a small dinner gathering. Arriving at a sleek modern mansion tucked away in Banana Island, Michael's jaw nearly dropped. The opulent space, adorned with imported art, gleaming marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lagoon, radiated wealth far beyond Clara's unassuming persona. He scanned the room, noting influential business magnates, politicians, and socialites, all speaking with her as if she were the center of the universe. "Clara," how Michael began, but she raised a finger, smiling. "Let's not spoil the surprise," she said, guiding him inside. As they mingled, he realized that every interaction he had with her, every time he thought he understood her, was carefully curated. She was not merely hosting. She was orchestrating influence, quietly directing conversations, facilitating deals, building networks with a skill that left him dumbstruck. Flashback. Clara's father had built an empire in silence, a conglomerate spanning real estate, technology, and energy. From a young age, she was trained in discretion, patience, and strategy. Unlike the flamboyant heirs of other families, she learned to conceal her wealth, to study human nature, and to wield influence without the world noticing. She had watched people like Michael charming, confident, slightly arrogant, assume they could read everyone they met. She knew arrogance often preceded downfall. That night, Michael felt the weight of realization pressing down on him. The woman he had courted, loved, and admired was a billionaire. Every decision he had made in her presence, every assumption about her lifestyle and intentions, had been based on a lie he had constructed in his own mind. But Clara, calm as ever, was patient. She let him observe slowly, the truth revealing itself. She wanted him to understand the magnitude of her intellect, the reach of her influence, and the consequences of underestimating her. As they left the gathering, Michael struggled to compose himself. I had no idea," he murmured. Clara's eyes glimmered. "Now you know," she said softly. "And the question is, what will you do with this knowledge?" Her words were both a challenge and a warning. Michael had always thrived on control and dominance, but he was beginning to understand that Clara's patience and subtle power had outmaneuvered him completely. The city lights reflected in the water below as they drove back. Michael's mind raced, realizing that for months he had been playing a game whose rules he never understood. Every flirtation, every witty remark, every moment of charm had been quietly observed, evaluated, and stored by someone far more clever and patient than he had ever imagined. That night, lying awake in his apartment, Michael's thoughts spiraled. He realized that Clara's secret wealth was not just about money, it was about knowledge, strategy, and patience. She had built an empire in silence, and he, the man who believed himself perceptive, had been blind. In that realization, he began to feel the first true pangs of regret and fear. He understood now that love, power, and betrayal were intertwined in ways he had never considered. And he also understood that the coming confrontation would not be simple. The game had only just begun. Michael's mind was a storm of confusion and regret. The revelation of Clara's wealth had shaken him. But it wasn't just her fortune that unsettled him. It was the way she had quietly mastered every interaction, every decision, every perception. Pride, which had always been his strength, now felt like a weakness. He found himself questioning every choice he had made around her. The nights he spent boasting about his minor business successes, the moments he assumed he understood her intentions, the subtle dismissals of her advice, they all replayed in his mind like a harsh echo. Clara had never once corrected him, never flaunted her wealth, yet she had silently observed, waited, and planned. Tension mounted further when Olivia, Michael's ex-girlfriend, unexpectedly reappeared. She had assumed that Michael's charm was enough to regain influence over him. But Clara's presence, calm and commanding, immediately shifted the dynamics. Olivia, unaware of the billionaire empire Clara controlled, tried to provoke jealousy, but Michael, for the first time, realized he was no longer in control of the narrative. Clara, in her subtle brilliance, let the confrontation unfold naturally. She didn't need to fight. Her presence alone made the truth undeniable. Olivia left confused and defeated, while Michael's pride burned quietly, mixing shame with fascination. He began to see the depth of Clara's patience, her strategy, and her unyielding wisdom. Flashback. As a child, Clara's mother had told her, "True power lies in silence, in observing before acting. Those who underestimate you will teach you everything you need to know." Clara had carried this lesson into adulthood, cultivating influence and wisdom while keeping the world and Michael blissfully unaware. Now, in the heart of Lagos, surrounded by skyscrapers that mirrored ambition and pride, Michael realized the magnitude of his misjudgment. Every casual remark he had made, every assumption about Clara's simplicity, had been based on his own arrogance. And the woman he thought he knew, the one he had loved, was operating on a level far beyond his comprehension. One evening, as they walked along the marina, Clara finally addressed the tension directly. "You see, Michael, life is not about appearances. It's about depth, patience, and the choices we make when no one is watching." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes held a sharp edge. "You assumed you knew me, and that was your first mistake. But it's not too late to learn from it if you're willing." Michael's heart pounded. He wanted to apologize, to make amends, but words failed him. He had been blind to her power, blind to her intelligence, blind to the subtle ways she had built her empire. For the first time, he felt entirely exposed, not just as a lover, but as a man who had underestimated the woman he adored. The stakes were higher than ever. Michael's pride, his love, and his understanding of power were all on the line. Clara had never revealed her full hand, and yet, with every calculated step, she had shown him the consequences of underestimating a mind and heart as formidable as hers. He now understood the bitter truth. The woman he thought he had won had been leading him into a revelation he could never have anticipated. And soon, the ultimate truth, her billionaire identity, would be unveiled in a way that would forever alter the course of their lives. Michael never forgot the day the truth hit him like a tidal wave. It was an ordinary Thursday or so, he thought, until Clara invited him to her office. She had always avoided flaunting her wealth, keeping her empire hidden in plain sight. But today, she would remove the veil entirely. The elevator opened to a panoramic office, overlooking Lagos skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city below, a symbol of ambition, power, and endless opportunity. Michael's eyes widened. Every detail spoke of immense wealth. Rare art adorning the walls, sleek modern furniture imported from Italy, and digital screens displaying stock markets, company data, and philanthropic ventures that spanned continents. Clara turned, calm and composed. "Do you see now, Michael?" she asked softly, but her tone carried authority. "Every step you've taken, every assumption you've made, has been under my watchful eye." Michael staggered back, his pride crumbling. I had no idea." She smiled faintly, eyes sharp with both kindness and reprimand. "Of course you didn't. That was the point. I wanted you to see, not just hear, the consequences of underestimating someone, of assuming appearances reflect reality." Flashback. Clara had inherited a business empire quietly after her father passed away. From real estate to tech startups, from banks to international charities, she controlled wealth in the shadows, mastering strategy, patience, and discretion. Unlike others who flaunted their power, Clara had learned early that influence was far more effective when invisible, and lessons were far more powerful when earned. Michael's heart pounded. He thought of the times he had dismissed her advice, overlooked her intelligence, and believed he understood her life. He realized now that every interaction had been a lesson. Patience, observation, and humility. And every subtle move Clara had made had been deliberate. shaping him into a man who could recognize true power when it revealed itself. I don't know what to say, Michael whispered, a mix of awe and regret in his voice. Clara approached him, gently touching his arm. You don't need to say anything. But understand this. Wealth is fleeting, pride is dangerous, and trust is priceless. I hid my fortune not to deceive, but to teach, and to see who would respect me for who I am, not what I own.
Oh.
Tears welled in Michael's eyes. He finally grasped the lessons Clara had woven into every moment: loyalty, patience, observation, and respect. His arrogance had blinded him, and the revelation of her billionaire status was both a shock and a gift. Outside the window, Lagos glittered in the late afternoon sun, a city of ambition and dreams. Michael realized that Clara's brilliance wasn't just in her wealth, it was in her heart, her mind and her ability to transform betrayal into empowerment. He stepped closer, humbled and changed. Clara, you've shown me everything I needed to learn. I'm sorry for underestimating you. Clara smiled warmly, the calm power of her presence settling over him. Apologies aren't enough, but change, understanding, and respect. Those are priceless. As Michael looked at her, he understood that he had witnessed not just the revelation of a hidden billionaire, but the unveiling of a woman whose wisdom, patience, and power transcended money. And for the first time, he realized the true meaning of love, loyalty, and the consequences of arrogance. Clara had won not with confrontation, but with strategy, subtlety, and unshakable integrity. And Michael forever changed, finally understood. Some lessons can only be learned when the truth is revealed in full. And some love cannot be broken because it carries both power and wisdom.